This is the second edition of Capital Clarity for the 2023 legislative session. I'd like to welcome you all here. Those of you who are here in the room, I appreciate you making the trek through the snow to come out here. I hope you all made it here safely. And those of you who are probably wisely staying at home or in your office, welcome as well. My name is Brian Allman. I am the new communications director for the Idaho Freedom Foundation. It is my privilege to be here. Of all the things that are being dumped on my plate this last week as I transition into this new role, I think this is going to be my favorite because this really is at the heart of the mission of the Idaho Freedom Foundation. It is connecting citizens and voters with lawmakers and representatives. And oftentimes, there can seem like there's a gap between those two groups of people. You see them on TV, you hear them on the radio, you get their campaign ads, you vote for them, and then, well, who knows? Who knows what they're actually doing? And then 2 years later, they come back again. In other states, there is a gap there. I lived most of my life in Washington before moving out here almost 5 years ago. And it seemed like they lived in a completely different world. But since I've come here to Idaho, I've been so impressed with the transparency and accessibility of our elected representatives. And the ability to just come here into this room and sit next to the people that you voted for and be able to talk to them, shake their hands, look them in the eye, ask them why they voted on something, tell them why you think they should vote on something. I think that's one of the great blessings of liberty, one of the great things about America that our founders envisioned. So this is going to be a lot of fun this year. We are going to do this every Thursday at noon in this room. We're going to bring you lawmakers and activists and experts and people who know about the issues, who know what's going on in our government and in our state, and can give you not only information, but tools to help keep your elected officials accountable, to help make a difference in our state. And that's actually what we're going to do today. We have our very own Anna Miller and Kaitlyn Shepard from Idaho Freedom Foundation's Center for American Education. And they will be speaking, they will be telling you about what is going on in our public schools. And they will not only that, they will give you some tools to help you be able to make a difference and make a change. So, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Anna Miller.
Hey everyone, as Brian said, I'm Anna Miller. I'm the director of Idaho Freedom Foundation Center for American Education. So our mission at this center is to transform the state's and nation's education system such that it best serves the families and students who utilize it. So we work on a lot of different types of reform. We work on restoring parental rights in K-12 schools. We work on abolishing diversity and equity and inclusion bureaucracies in higher education. We work on making sure that parents and taxpayers are getting a positive return on their investment from college degrees, and a lot of other different types of issues. So today, I want to give you guys a look into some of the research that we've been working on. I work on issues that are up close and personal in Idaho, looking at things on a micro level, and then I also work on issues across the country, doing research in other states and doing national research. We have a big national report that's going to be coming out soon, and that's what I'm going to speak to today. But to give you guys an understanding of how all of this ties into what's happening in Idaho and our own back doors, I wanted to quickly show you guys a video that we previously put together, basically showing how certain federal strings that our state has adopted are beginning to corrupt schools on the local level. So I'll let Brian play this video, and then I'll talk with you guys some more.
Hi, I'm Anna Miller with the Center for American Education. Do you ever wonder how public schools come to promote radical gender theories? Or how schools in red states build partnerships with Planned Parenthood to deliver sex education? Follow the money and the curriculum, and you can understand what's happening. Step 1. The federal government has several grant programs for states to offer comprehensive sex education programs. States can only get a grant if they pick programs approved by national bureaucrats. Bureaucrats use national standards for sexuality and education, written by radical interest groups to guide their approval. These interest groups not only write the standards, but then create and sell the curriculum. Planned Parenthood is the chief interest group writing the standards and profiting from these curricula. Step 2. Idaho's Department of Health and Welfare accepts sex education grants, And then the state implements a curriculum called Reducing the Risk. This curriculum promotes high-risk sexual action. It seeks to normalize sexual activity among children. It is LGBTQ inclusive, instructing students in gender identity, sexual orientation, and transgender ideology. Parental consent is often disregarded, and reducing the risk refers students to Planned Parenthood for their sexual needs. Step 3, the Department of Health and Welfare directs public health districts to implement this sex education program in schools and to use associated training and materials. Idaho North Central Health District website, for instance, offers educators training on queering education and porn literacy. Another resource takes kids to Power to Decide, showing kids where to get an abortion. Another resource shows kids how to hide their browsing history from parents and introduces topics like polyamory and gender transition. The Sex Etc. resource shows students articles such as transgender men can get pregnant too, surveys about masturbation, and amaze.org videos featuring cartoon depictions of porn and abortion. Government agencies promote radical ideologies and behaviors, perhaps without school boards even knowing it. These programs conflict with Idaho law and with the values that make Idaho special. This must stop. The health and innocence of our children are at stake.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I've been studying the education system in Idaho for several years, as well as the system across the country. And one thing has become abundantly clear, which is that we're really at an inflection point in our education system. There's a big debate about queer books and libraries, whether or not 6-year-olds should get puberty blockers, or young kids transitioning that are arising in nearly every state. People have moved from California or New York to escape the madness of transgender advocacy for radical sexual teachings. But then they're shocked to find the exact same things happening in red states to which they've moved. Why are red state school systems pushing the same corrupt education practices as blue states? Why are local school boards in red state suburbia pushing transgender ideology? These actions are broadly unpopular, yet they're happening everywhere and all at the same time. And it looks to be the result of coordination. And it is. Behind this ever-radicalizing capture of our education system is one pressure group, and that's Planned Parenthood. They're pushing what they call comprehensive sex education. Planned Parenthood is known mostly for advocating for abortion and birth control. But a while ago, they got into what's known as the comprehensive sex education business. The full extent of their capture of America's public education system has scarcely been noticed. Just as the gender madness is everywhere, Planned Parenthood seems to be everywhere. And this is not a coincidence. There's headlines across the country that show how Planned Parenthood is pushing a very radical sex education agenda. And I want to just give you guys a few examples. Planned Parenthood is looking for a backdoor into North Dakota schools. North Carolina parents signed a petition to get Planned Parenthood curriculum teaching 6th graders about sodomy out of schools. Florida public schools show students graphic sexual video from Planned Parenthood without parental consent. The Idaho Department of Health and Welfare implements Planned Parenthood endorsed sex education in schools. Texas School District unanimously approves Planned Parenthood graphic hands-on sex education. Illinois adopts national sex education standards written by Planned Parenthood and teaching kindergartners through 3rd graders about gender identity and hormone blockers. So as this list shows, comprehensive sex education is far from traditional. For Planned Parenthood, comprehensive sex education is a vehicle for cultural revolution. They seek to displace marital sex with celebrations for all alternatives. Marital, monogamous, procreative sexuality is the supposed structure of oppression that needs to be dismantled, while all other varieties of sexualities need to be welcomed in a value-neutral celebration. Comprehensive sex education in K-12 schools, according to Planned Parenthood, encourages students to explore their sexual orientation and different gender identity, to explore sexual relationships based on the full spectrum of ways people choose to be or not to be sexual beings. It includes exposing how society uses shame and stigma, and how power and identity and oppression impact sexual wellness and reproductive freedom. This is then combined with the promise to celebrate the sexual liberation, from these supposedly oppressive structures. Planned Parenthood has in part gained such prominence in our schools, in part through just the normal policymaking process under our increasingly bureaucratic state. There's a new kind of iron triangle that has emerged, and it's focused on cultural revolution. Congress is funding the instruments of revolution. So now I'm going to tell you how Planned Parenthood is getting into our schools. First, executive administration uses regulation to promote interest groups who promote the revolution. Interest groups promote it on the ground. Private-public partnerships form with the purpose of assisting the revolution along. In this particular case, for comprehensive sex education, Planned Parenthood teams with ideas for federal grant programs to implement these programs. And here's the first step. Planned Parenthood applies pressure on legislators and bureaucrats to shape the policymaking process and to pursue their interests. Congress then complies. It establishes programs, and then it grows those programs. Step 2, Planned Parenthood helps write standards that the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services uses to direct grantees to design their programs and get approval for grants. The Department of Health and Human Services accepts the help. Planned Parenthood applies for the grants, and they win a large proportion of them. Step 3, Planned Parenthood finds local partners to apply for the grants so that they can then promote comprehensive sex education in local areas or through state agencies. Planned Parenthood and its affiliates prepare curriculum that can be bought through the grants. Step 4, Planned Parenthood provides trainers in sex education for local communities. When Planned Parenthood is ready for a new role in the sexual revolution, it then prepares new curriculum and it sells them to its partners. And the proof is really in the results. As we're going to show in an upcoming report by the Center for American Education and the Claremont Institute Center for the American Way of Life, Planned Parenthood and its allies actually won 80% of all sex education grant money in the 2020 to 2023 grant cycle. If you assume a similar rate since the inception of the main comprehensive sex education grants that the Department of Health and Human Services has, then Planned Parenthood has won approximately $1.6 billion since the inception of these programs. So transgender ideology, queer theory, and sexualizing childhood are everywhere because Planned Parenthood is everywhere, promoting them through comprehensive sex education programs. The system is certainly complicated, of course, all the better to disguise the subversive control that Planned Parenthood exercises. In red states, they often practice a bait and switch, where Planned Parenthood promises to deliver abstinence-only education. These programs then redefine abstinence, and then they promote moral corruption under that same label. At other times in blue locales, Planned Parenthood sells the exact same curriculum directly, but in the name of tolerance and safety. Our federal sex education programs are private-public partnerships, and they're guided by Planned Parenthood's extreme gender ideology. The public funds the private, who then promotes corruption in our public schools. This sex ed industrial complex then develops scores of overlapping curricula to sell on the free market, where they then crowd out all alternatives. So we're left with the question of what can and should be done. First, parents, citizens like yourselves, you can pressure school boards to remove this sexualized content from their schools. State legislators also have an important role to play. They can cut off the federal spigot that keeps these programs running. Governors and attorney generals can launch a full-scale investigation into Planned Parenthood's involvement in our public schools. And Congress can put these programs under the microscope and use the knife to cut them. But I would argue that it's high time that we demobilize the armies of Planned Parenthood trainers and curriculum developers who are waging a sexual war on the American people. And we hope that you guys will join us in our efforts to achieve this. So that's just a window for you guys into one of our upcoming reports that will be available on our website in the coming weeks. But we also, like I said, we've worked on issues specifically in Idaho. We actually have gotten very up close and personal in tracking what's happening in every school district across Idaho through a new tool that our researcher Kaitlyn has developed, and it's called the Leadership in Education and Academic Development Map. And it tracks what's happening in every school district across Idaho, from academic performance to spending to radical ideological incidents that have occurred in different schools. So I want to invite Kaitlyn up here real quick to show you guys that resource, and then we'll take some time to answer questions if anyone has any. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, hello everyone. As Anna mentioned, my name is Kaitlyn Shepard. I'm a research assistant here with IFF's Center for American Education, and I'm here today to introduce you to two of our resources that I think can help you learn more about what's going on in Idaho's education system. So the first one is our Idaho K-12 map, and this is an interactive online tool that evaluates each school district in Idaho based on two metrics. The first is students' academic performance on standardized tests, such as the Idaho Reading Indicator and the Idaho Standards Achievement Test. And the second factor is the number of critical social justice incidents that have been identified for that particular school district. So we're defining a social justice incident as any case in which the tenets of critical race theory or radical gender theory or any of these other Marxist theories are coming into school districts through a variety of different vehicles. And these can take several forms. They can be a homework assignment, a district-wide policy, perhaps a display that was at the school, or a social emotional learning program, a school club. So there are a variety of different vehicles that these ideas get into our school districts. So after we identified both of these factors for each school district, we assigned a color to each district to kind of say how they're doing on these two metrics. As a general rule, a district that appears green is going to be one where they have better academic performance and a few number of social justice incidents, while a district that's red is going to be one where they have poor academic performance, a large number of CSJ incidents, or both. Districts that are yellow are somewhere in the middle, and there are also a few gray districts, and these are ones that didn't have enough information available for us to be able to properly evaluate them. So these are two factors that we felt would help parents and residents like you get a better idea of what's going on in your local school district. The map also gives a lot of other helpful information about your local school district that you might be interested in knowing. You can learn the district spending per student, the superintendent's salary, the rainy day or reserve fund balances, basically how much the district has set aside that they are saving and not spending. You can also learn about diversity, equity, and inclusion officers, if there are any. And finally, you can learn about nearby alternative educational providers. And these are private schools, charter schools, and a few homeschool groups that we've identified that are in the same city as the district office. So all of these categories of information are available for all the school districts in Idaho. You can find your district by either just clicking on it on the map if you know your location. There's also a drop-down menu below the map. You can select your district from the list. You can view the lead map by going to our website. It's centerforamericaneducation.org, and there's a tab at the top of the screen that says lead map, or you can just search for leadmap.org, and it'll take you straight to the map. So this is one of our newer resources that we're really excited about. We hope it helps individuals have a better understanding of what's going on in their local public school district. The second resource I'd like to share with you today is actually our newest report that is coming out today. It's called the Radical Gender Theory Toolkit, and it'll be available on our website later today. We also have, for those of you who are here with us in person, we're so grateful that you braved the weather to be here with us today. So we have some copies on the back table that you're more than welcome to take with you on your way out. So what do we mean by radical gender theory? Writer and activist Christopher Rufo describes radical gender theory as kind of this catch-all term for what's known in academic circles as queer theory, transgender ideology, and gender identity activism. So it's kind of a catch-all term for all of these ideas that are coming into our school systems. And as the definition shows, there are several facets to radical gender theory, but one of the ideas that is behind this ideology that it's trying to show is create confusion around the ideas of gender and biological sex, with the effect that it destabilizes family relationships, confuses children, about these concepts and destroys childhood innocence. So if you as a parent are concerned about your student being exposed to these type of ideas, we hope that this toolkit can help empower you with knowledge that you need to protect your kids. And if you are just a resident concerned about the direction of education in Idaho and across the country, we also hope that this toolkit will provide you with valuable information so you can have a better picture of some of these ideologies that are going on in education across the nation. So if you read the toolkit, you'll learn a lot of valuable things, such as what radical gender theory is and the ideas behind it, what it teaches, how it shows up in our schools, and specific steps that you can take to fight this ideology in your local school district. And to address these important questions, we partnered with several great organizations and scholars and experts, including experts from Heritage Foundation, Family Research Council, Parents Defending Education, and Pacific Justice Institute, to kind of put this information together for you. And we hope that this toolkit helps empower parents and residents to understand not only what's going on, but also to advocate against the spread of radical gender ideology in schools. So digital copies are going to be available on our website later today, and I believe if you would like to download one of those, the address will be idahofreedom.org/gender-toolkit. So we hope that these resources are helpful to you as you seek to get a greater understanding of Idaho's education system, and we'll be happy to stand for any questions.
All right, well, if anyone has any questions, we'd be happy to take them, or comments, or any of that. I think we have about five or 6 minutes, so. Yes, in the back.
I'm just wondering, how do you find out in the Senate who voted for what? Is that possible?
In Congress?
Yes.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes.
Yeah, so the question is, how can we find out who voted for what in Congress? So the specific comprehensive sex education grant programs that I've been discussing have been around for about a decade. So the way you would find out who voted to establish those, well, several of them were established under Obamacare. And so you can go to the Library of Congress and look at legislative archives that show the votes on Obamacare. It's all wrapped into those bills. The Library of Congress is your best bet to see who specifically voted on them. But if you want to look it up, I can give you the specific grant names, which are the Title V Sexual Risk Avoidance Education Grant, the General Departmental Funded Sexual Risk Avoidance Education Grant, the Personal Responsibility Education Program, and the Teen Pregnancy Prevention Program. So those are 5 main grants. 3 of them are under the Department of Health and Human Services, and 1 of them is under CDC. And most of them were created through Obamacare, and then a couple were done in the 90s and kind of have adopted new meanings now from what was the original legislative intent for them. Yes.
I have a suggestion. I believe the founders of the United States Constitution, our country, put the answer right here in the very first sentence of the First Amendment. It reads, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion." To me, that is the answer right there. We need that right here, and we need to cut off funding to this religion. That's what this is. Sorry, I don't have a question.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
You had indicated in your conversation that Planned Parenthood sort of monopolizes the curriculum and instructors, those types of things. What other, is it because there's not enough other curriculum developers out there? And if there are curriculum developers out there, how can we influence them or give them more support so that they're a larger play in the market?
Yeah, that's a really important question. So first, Planned Parenthood is the largest provider of comprehensive sex education in the country. They're number 1, they brag about this on their own website. As far as the development of curriculum, the issue here, it's not that there aren't different opinions out there, that there's plenty of nonprofits and things that want to develop either abstinence-focused sex education or sex education for Christian worldview or whatever it may be as an alternative to what Planned Parenthood is doing. The issue is that Congress does not fund those groups. They fund programs that are either endorsed, created, researched, or sold by Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood of Santa Cruz actually founded an organization called Education, Training, and Research back in the 90s. And the vast majority of their curriculum is endorsed by Planned Parenthood. And you can discover this just by simply searching for these curricula that they sell online, and you'll find Planned Parenthood affiliates all across the whole country delivering this sex education themselves to students. So they don't just say this is a good curriculum, they actually teach it to kids themselves in public schools or in other settings. So that's the problem, is that the federal government is picking a particular ideology to fund a particular view of what sex education could be. It just so happens to be the Planned Parenthood view. Now, under these sex education grants, there are a few true abstinence programs, but they are rarely used. More grants get approved that adopt the comprehensive sex education Planned Parenthood view than the standard abstinence view, which was the actual original legislative intent of a couple of these federal grant programs. And it's so much skewed that it's literally 80%. It's not just 60-40, it's 80%. Yes.
First of all, I want to thank you guys, because you have done so much work to uncover what is really truly happening, because our state standards are very clear, abstinence. So my first question is, how in the world are these school districts getting away with what they're doing? Because they are bringing in, obviously, Planned Parenthood. Personally, I know that our health districts are being brought in to teach things that they should not be teaching. So that's my first question. My second question is, having met with the head of our state administrators, he said to me that students want to know all of these things. They're begging to know all of these things. And shame on us parents for not teaching them all of these things. And so it is their job to teach these things. And they plan, the administrators, plan on changing the state standards to include all of these things. And that the parents that come down to the Capitol are the minority. And I want to make sure I get this right, that we don't matter. We don't, we're just a minority. We don't matter. And so how are we going to get in front of this? I mean, heaven forbid that our legislators approve it if they do bring this, the standard changes, because our legislators do have to approve those standard changes. But we're finding that even with the standards only being abstinence, they're teaching whatever they want anyway. So how do we get in front of it, number one, these changes they want to bring? And number two, it does just say abstinence, so how are they teaching whatever they want to teach anyway?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. So the question is basically, how are school districts getting away with this? And then how do we stop it, right? So how do they get away with it? So actually the way these federal grants are designed, it's very sneaky. Everything is supposed to be medically accurate. The way they define medical accuracy is based on studies that none of them are independently evaluated. Some of them are done by the curriculum authors themselves, which means some of these studies are done by Planned Parenthood affiliates. And so in none of these studies show that none of them actually demonstrate that it makes teen pregnancy or that condom use will be more frequent or any of these other outcomes that you would expect. They actually show the opposite when you use real protective outcomes. And so their definition of medically accurate is very evasive. And this is done through a process called the Teen Pregnancy Prevention Review, which you can find on federal government websites. I'd be happy to direct it to you if you really want to look at this in depth. But yeah, so their definitions for medically accurate are not good. Their definition for abstinence in the federal government is actually fine. The definition includes abstinence only until marriage, among other things that these curriculum are required to teach. So this is where Planned Parenthood comes into play. These curricula, most of them, not all of them, most of them say they promote abstinence, which just sounds great. It sounds like it complies with federal law. If you actually read these curricula, they redefine abstinence to mean, here's one example. Reducing the risk says abstinence means avoiding sexual activity that carries a risk for pregnancy or STD, HIV. So supposedly you can participate in all sorts of sexual acts as a kid, as long as you don't get a disease or as long as you don't get pregnant. You can get pregnant and go get an abortion. Is that considered abstinence? I think it's pretty clear that that's not what legislative intent was under these programs. And so that's how they're getting away with it. They redefine abstinence bureaucrats don't look into these programs, or they do and they're just kind of a cog in the machine that gets overlooked, and somehow all these programs continue getting approved. Or again, they don't realize what version of abstinence they're actually teaching, and no one actually follows up on these types of things. How do we stop it? Well, the ideal way to stop it would be for Congress to completely get rid of these programs, which is actually tried during the Trump administration, and his efforts unfortunately failed. Planned Parenthood lobbied really hard, and Congress was not able to overturn it, these programs. Another option for red states like Idaho is simply to start rejecting these federal grants. Idaho accepts 2 of them, Title V Sexual Risk Avoidance Education and the Personal Responsibility Education Program. That's what's funding these programs in Idaho. And it's the Department of Education. It's done through the Department of Health and Welfare. And that means that it's then going through health districts who then give skewed information to local school districts, so they don't really know what they're adopting. They think they're adopting something that's a medically accurate abstinence program. Why wouldn't we want to deliver that to kids? Then they give parents these opt-out forms that say, again, it's abstinence only, it's medically accurate, and that couldn't be further from the truth. So an easy way to stop at the legislative level would be to simply reject these grants, stop accepting these federal dollars. At the local level, you could just not agree to allow the health districts to work with students in your school to deliver this education. Yes.
How much of this is actually, could the Congress in DC actually do, and how much the unelected officials of these different health department and CDC and all that, where Congress really can't fire these people for creating these programs? Is there a way the unelected groups like CDC and health departments and all that can be removed?
Yeah, so obviously the leadership in these departments, the Department of Health and Human Services or the CDC, changes based on who's in the White House. So under the Trump administration, one administrative unit under Health and Human Services, the Family Youth and Services Bureau, had a very strong leader, and he worked very hard to try and enforce legislative intent regarding abstinence in these programs. Now they have new leadership. So if you could have strong leadership, that is definitely going to impact the direction of these grant programs and how strong the grant reviewers are. However, I would argue that these grant programs really can't be saved. Planned Parenthood has monopolized the comprehensive sex education industry to such a degree that it would be extremely hard to avoid funding this ideology through education in schools. And so a better alternative for Congress is not just to have better leaders in these administrations or to write stronger legislative intent. They should get rid of these programs entirely, which they have 100% power to do. And again, during the Trump administration, they tried to do some of that. Yes.
How much, more local level, how much of the money doesn't go through the review of the legislature itself, but is something at the discretion of the executive part of the state, and is so more difficult to impact because it's just one person that decides it and one group of agencies that are not directly elected? I think that's a more interesting question to me than what Congress does, which should have less influence.
Yeah, so how much of these programs have legislative oversight in Idaho versus just executive administration oversight? So the role that the legislature plays is that they approve the adoption of certain federal grants, which basically what the legislature sees, or they might not even see these line items. They might be hidden and wrapped up in another line item, but generally, the Joint Finance Appropriation Committee would see a line item for sexual risk avoidance or for personal responsibility education, and they would think these are, abstinence-only programs. The legislature as a whole has to approve the adoption of those budgets. Otherwise, the departments would not be able to implement these programs in schools at all. So it does hinge on legislative approval for the money. If they didn't get the money, they wouldn't be implementing these programs. So the legislature does play a big role in this. Executive administration in like the Department of Health and Welfare, for example, wouldn't be able to put these sex education programs in school without the establishment of those programs and the federal guidance that the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services are giving them. Does that answer your question?
I think so, but it sounds like a major educational effort would be to make sure that all the people in the legislature understand what these things really mean.
Yes, absolutely. That's one of our main goals is to, get legislators to pay attention to these grants and the federal strings that are at them. Yes.
another statement, excuse me. So I think this is a symptom of a much bigger problem. This is one religion of many that is being funded by our government. Just think to yourself right now of all the other religions that are funded by our government. This has to stop. When we tackle this gender ideology religion, we have to tackle all the other ones.
The woman in the orange vest.
I'm Jean Mollenkoff Moore, and it was in the late 1970s that I became very active in the pro-life movement. And with that, I did my own research into Planned Parenthood. Shocking. When you do your own research, you dig into the books that were actually written by Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood. And this woman, of course, it was all to help eliminate certain ethnic groups, such as the Black race, a lot of Hispanics, etc. But she believed anything went. So you read her literature, and I tell people, this was in the 1920s. This is a corrupt, disgusting, perverted organization. She wrote that even having sex with dogs, with your animals, was an acceptable thing. And I tell people that. This is Planned Parenthood. Anything goes. And our nation is being taken down, our children, our youth, by this sex education. So, thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, this will have to be the last question, unfortunately, as we have one more speaker who wants to come up. Yes.
Hi, so I like to narrow it down to what you're saying. So if the funding is coming from health and welfare, it looks like in the state of Idaho, health and welfare and then education are the biggest budgets. And so isn't that under the control now of the House? And is it good to now educate the House to pull the, strings and to tighten the budget up, and so that this can be choked out, that we're not funding it? That's kind of one question. And the second question is it too late once we've received the funds? Like, how do we cut ties? Like, oh, my bad, we don't want those funds.
Yeah, so basically, to answer your question, the legislature could just reject these federal funds and stop accepting the grants. And that would solve a huge part of this problem. School districts could still adopt sex education programs if they wanted to. It could be Planned Parenthood endorsed program, but at least we're not accepting federal funding and federal guidance that's fueling the growth of these programs. As a state, we would have more independence to decide that. Well, I'll have Brian come back up here and introduce our final speaker for you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna and Kaitlyn, and just want to point out that the work that they do, this is just, the tip of the iceberg. They're really digging into these issues that we need to know about. So after hearing all that, people want to know, okay, what can we do? And so I am so thankful that I have somebody here who can explain what we can do and what is being done to try and stop these things. The person I originally invited here, his bill is not yet ready, so he wasn't to talk about it, but Senator Ben Taves, the vice chair of the Station Committee, was very gracious to come down here and speak to you today.
Thank you. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to speak with you all today. I just want to recognize what Anna and Kaitlyn are doing. I think it's an amazing work. And can we just give them a round of applause? So I'm just going to give you a little bit about my background. As I was going door to door campaigning, I had a few different issues that I wanted to deal with. And really quickly, talking to the people of our community, I realized that education was the top issue and would be the top issue for me if I were to be elected. And there's not really anything better that you can do to get a pulse on what's going on in your community than going door to door and talking to people. And I think it was probably the most rewarding one of the most rewarding experiences of my life to be able to talk to so many people. I think I probably talked to between 1,000 and 2,000 people. And what I got was a lot of stories. Now I recognize that stories are anecdotal evidence, but I think we all know that where there's smoke, there's fire. So I'm going to share a few stories of what I found going door to door in our community up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And I'm going to talk to you about what I recognize as a very real issue, or some very real issues, and then what I see as a solution. So going door to door, one parent that I met, actually somebody who moved in from out of state, he moved from California. There's a lot of those, right? So he moved from California to northern Idaho, and he said, all right, finally I'm in a conservative place where I can send my kids to school and I don't have to worry about what they're taught. So he sent his son to the local middle school, and there was, what he tells me is he's like, there was no critical race theory class, but he realized very quickly that it was built into the curriculum. He said that he was first made aware of it when his son started talking to him about a proofreading assignment that he had. So he's in an English class, he has a proofreading assignment, and it has some tenets of critical race theory built into the proofreading just to start getting the students to think about it. So when I heard that, I had this realization, I'm like, there's a top-down approach to a lot of these things, and I believe we passed legislation last session to stop critical race theory in schools. Is that correct? Yeah. So this was after that, and it's still there. But the reality is that they're not going to call it critical race theory. They're just going to put it under the guise of proofreading or literature or whatever else. So I had a realization that a top-down approach and a sort of a lot of legislative efforts that are I mean, we're trying to do it for the right reasons and we're trying to do the right thing, but they may not have the effect that we're hoping that they'll have. Another instance, I had a very prominent member of our community. I was talking with him, and he told me that his granddaughter had, she went to Lakes Middle School, which I went to Lakes Middle School in Coeur d'Alene, and he said that his granddaughter came home to her mother and said, "Mom, all of my friends are now lesbians. Am I a lesbian?" So, of course, they had some conversations and a realization that the environment might not be the kind of school, the kind of place that they want their child. And so they had the means to pull their child out of that school environment and put her into a private school. I'm going to give you one more instance, and then I'm going to talk to you about the solution that I see. So the last is my wife, one of her friends, explained to her about her son who was in second grade at, I believe, it's one of the elementary schools in the Coeur d'Alene area. And her son came home and he was very upset. And he actually, he lives in a family, I believe they have relatives that are African American. And he came home crying and he said, "Mom, I don't want to be white anymore." And his mom said, "What are you talking about? Why would you ever say that? Why is that even crossing your mind," right? And he said, he showed her a coloring assignment that they had, and it was a picture of a bunch of white kids in a playground, and all of the black kids on the outside of the playground being left out. So his translation of that is, white is bad. White people are oppressors. This is happening in our schools. There's not a question in my mind whether or not this is happening. It's just a reality. Where all it comes from, I mean, I'd love to say that if we cut off the funding, that it would go away. I think that would help, but I'm not convinced that that would be the real solution. And so that brings me to what I believe is the real solution. And I believe that the real solution is accountability for our school system. Accountability for our school system is what can make the real difference. And that's why myself and some of my colleagues are supporting educational savings accounts. So what an educational savings account will do, is it will give the opportunity for parents to choose alternative forms of education for their children. There's different reasons you would do that. Maybe your child has special needs and they need some different educational solutions to help them. But maybe you don't agree with the values that are being taught in your local school and you find that out, and so you want to put them somewhere else. Now, my friend, a prominent member of our community, they have the means to pull them out. This is what breaks my heart, is to imagine that there are people in that same situation that know things are being taught to their children, but don't have the means to pull their kids out of the situation. They're forced to leave them there, knowing that it's going to have an impact on their life, knowing that it undermines the values that their family holds dear. And so what an education savings account would do, it would allow those parents to opt out of the system, to take the money can follow the student. Now they can choose a private school, maybe it can supplement tutoring, homeschool. There's so many different options out there, and with technology, there's more and more options for our children. But there's an accountability that happens when maybe there's one teacher. I think there's a lot of good teachers and a lot of good schools, and I say that all the time because I think it's sad that a lot of our teachers are feeling underappreciated or they're feeling attacked. But it just takes the few. So what I'd love is an accountability system where those children that are going to classes where there's a teacher that's woke or who's teaching radical gender theory, critical race theory, where they find out that suddenly the children are being pulled out of their classroom. Do you think administrators will notice? I think so. I think that the combination of the financial impact and the impact of the parents having a voice into the classrooms can have a dramatic, long-lasting impact. And I think that can have more impact than any top-down solution we can make. I think we just need to empower parents to do the right thing, and I think that they will in our communities. So those are my thoughts. Yeah. So if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them. Yeah.
You just made a strange suggestion pop up. You said the administrators would notice if they're taken out of the school. How about changing it so their salary is a per pupil rate?
Yeah, and I mean, in most scenarios, there would be some funding that would move out of the school system at least.
It would be personal.
Yeah, it would be more personal. I understand. Yep. Yeah.
So, how do we safeguard educational savings accounts 10 years down the road from being strangled by tentacles of mandatory backs or any kind of thing coming up?
I think it's a great question. I have the homeschool community will ask me how do I know that, similar question, how do we know that the state isn't going to try to take over our homeschooling and be involved there? Or I think that that's always at the door. I think it's like the enemy at the gates that we always have to recognize is there, and we have to be active, and we have to be voting and sending the right people down here to serve. So I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I think that we have to always be on guard, but that's a reality. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's a reality. But guess what? We know that to maintain the freedoms that we've been given by God and by our founders, we always have to be vigilant. And so I think it's the same answer, is that vigilance. Yeah.
My question is, so under the lockdowns and mandates that we experienced under COVID, the money was coming through Health and Human Services, under FEMA, under MOUs or memorandums of understanding with the federal government coming to the state of Idaho. Was the funding for this procured through the MOUs? So is it already paid for? Have we already agreed to it? Are the health districts now being used to implement that into the schools? And so does our voting not matter because it's already funded?
Yeah, in the short term, I'm guessing, yeah, you can kind of answer that. You probably have more information on it than I do, but I think that a lot of things change slowly, unfortunately, sometimes. But I would imagine that that money is already in place, and we know that our health districts are not elected positions. There was I had a lot of issues with our health district locally, and the fact that they could actually mandate certain activities for the local population. It seemed very odd that a non-elected board would do that. Do you have something to add to that?
That was a good answer.
Yeah, but I share your frustration, and I think cutting off the funding is part of the solution. Yeah.
I still say cut off all funding to public schools. No one is going to accept that idea. It's not popular. So the ESA one is the best way to get there. Let's support the ESA strategy and then cut off all funding for public schools, because we're never going to have religious schools competing on the same grounds as public schools and private schools if the ESAs can't go to the religious schools. And how does that make you feel if your religion is always secondary?
So let me just point out that due to a couple of court opinions, we know with certainty that funds can go from the public to private Christian schools. There's a court opinion on my daughter's birthday last year, June 21st of 2022, that helped make sure that funds can go to the religious schools. So that was encouraging. Back here, and I'll come up here. Yeah.
The conversation we're having, this seems to be a common thread, not just in education. Is there a way in Idaho, would it be legislature, how we got where we hear constantly there's no accountability to the bureaucrats? Health district, how would we go about turning that to where there is accountability? Can we elect those changes through the election? What do we do about that?
I would imagine change would go through the health and welfare committees, and so I believe that there are statutes that we could change or new laws that we could enact that would impact that. I imagine that the health districts are operating based on legislation, and so I'm sure there's solutions that could be taken care of through legislative means.
So is there a bill for this savings account in the works right now in the House or in the Senate that we can support?
Yeah, definitely. Anna can speak more to that. She actually authored that bill. It's in the process. I think we are hoping for a hearing next week on that. And it's an Arizona-based model, so it's a universal. One of the concerns that I have is if we do a very limited model, that it really won't help enough students. So the Arizona ESA model actually is universal, and so it's accessible to all students, not just a few. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you for letting me ask a question. My question is also about money in a different way. Could you tell me exactly how much out-of-state money Idaho Freedom Foundation dumped into Idaho, great state of Idaho last year? And where it came from?
So first of all, I'm a freshman legislator down here, Senator. I just arrived a few weeks ago, and I wouldn't be able to share the particulars of anything about the Idaho Freedom Foundation, although I do appreciate them setting up a forum where legislators interact with constituents. I think that it's critical for us. And my local newspaper asked me a question. They said, how important do you believe the Idaho Freedom Foundation is, and do you support them? And I said, well, to the degree that they report facts about freedom and how the legislators are doing in that regard, that's great. I think that it's very needed, and there probably should be another education foundation that reports on how well our legislators are doing on education and every other area. So I think that having groups that hold our legislators accountable is critical. Who funds them? I have no idea. I couldn't name one.
Well, I just believe that, the good citizens of Idaho would like to know where this money is coming from.
Sure. Yeah, I understand.
You deserve to know where the money's coming from.
Is there any other questions?
You can donate if you want.
Then you know it's coming from inside Idaho, I guess. Yes.
I just want to sure, because I was here with Senator Nichols at the town hall, and she wanted to make it clear that the savings account did not go to an organization, it went to individual families.
Correct.
And therefore they could distribute it how they wanted to see, and very clear that we don't say it can fund a private school in a general way, but
Sure.
we say the money's going to the family.
Yeah.
So she made that really clear, and she made it really clear not to say it's a voucher. So the first thing that I read in a fake news headline was vouchers.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure I'm communicating it correctly so that we can be behind you guys. I mean, we're behind it.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So when I said that public money could go to private schools based on a Supreme Court ruling, that's just the highest law in the land saying that this is factual. As far as how the mechanics of an ESA works, the money goes from the state into an educational savings account that is specifically for one particular child, and that family chooses however they want to spend that. And I just want to add one thing. The beauty of that situation is that there is an encouragement for frugality, so that parents can actually, that money rolls over, and if you happen to be frugal, I think that my family, we homeschool 3 of our 4 children right now. I'd say we spend about $1,500 to $2,000 on curriculum and education each year. If we were to participate, we would probably have the first year or 2 of college funded because we live frugally. Imagine a government program that encourages frugality. It's like unheard of.
Real quick, can I just clarify? A lot of people, no matter how you feel about school choice, a lot of people say the money is the government's money. It belongs to Idaho. I just want to clarify, it doesn't matter how you feel about school choice. Trust me, for my taxes, I know. The money is our money.
Yeah.
I mean, that is money we are paying. I homeschool my kids as well. And so I am paying for public school a lot. It's gone up a lot in 3 years, and there's another $210 million bond in my city. And that is our money that we are paying out. It is not the government's money.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Yeah,
Right.
Any money, it's kind of like when you get the check back from the governor or whatever. Sorry, that's just your money coming back to you.
Right.
It is 1 o'clock. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you to Anna and Kaitlyn. Thank you to Senator Tate for volunteering to speak at the last minute. Next week, we will be talking about protecting gun rights. So go to capitalclarity.com, sign up for email, sign up to give us suggestions on what you want to hear about, who you want to hear from. You can sign up for our mailing list in the back, pick up a copy of the Radical Gender Toolkit, figure out how you can put some pressure on your legislature and your school board. And thank you for coming. Stick around, talk to your lawmakers, and let's make some change.